Hi guys, my name is Charlie, and in this video I'm going to be continuing on spicing up your program drum tracks, focusing today on ghost notes. So ghost notes are a great way of making a fairly standard or boring drum part come to life, as they can add so much human feel and groove without necessarily changing the overall impact or beat that the drummer is actually playing. A great place to start with putting them is just in between kicks and snares. Typically this is where drummers will place them, but this isn't always the case, which I will go into. So the first thing we want to check is, does the library that you're using have a dedicated ghost note articulation? So for this video, I'm using Get Good Drums Modern and Massive, and as we can see here, they do have a ghost note articulation. It's not currently mapped to anything, so we're just going to map it to D#1. So if you watched the last video, you'll know I have these guitars that I wrote the drums to. I'm going to mute them for this ghost note section because we want to actually hear the ghost notes, and we're assuming that the drums are fairly solid at this point, so we don't need to reference the guitars really when doing ghost notes. So another thing that I like to do, especially when programming ghost notes, is turn off grid mode, use slip editing. A lot of what I do when it comes to drum programming uses slip editing because it lets me place the notes exactly where I want them to be, which inherently really gives them more of a human feel rather than starting locked into a grid, which a drummer is not going to do. I also generally like to add the ghost notes as one of, if not the last thing that I do when it comes to drum programming, because I find if you're trying to write or build a groove, if you're worrying about where the ghost notes are going to go, it can just slow down the process immensely. So here we've got this basic groove. And we're going to try dropping some ghost notes in between the kick and snare accents, and we'll probably delete some, but let's have a go. So two things I've noticed here. One is this bit here feels too open, which is either because there aren't enough ghost notes there or because there are too many everywhere else. So if you listen again, it just sounds like everything stops for half a bar and then keeps going, which I don't really like, so I'll change that in a second. But also here, I've deliberately not put any ghost notes in because I want the full impact to be on these kicks going into that drum fill. And if I busy that up with snare notes, firstly, I'd have to probably get rid of these cymbals, which I don't want to do, but it would also lose the impact that it has. So I'm now just going to get rid of some of them and see if we can narrow this down into something that really works. So I think I'm quite happy with that for now. So now all we're going to do is we're going to just select all the ghost notes, which you can either click and drag like that, or just press the D# key. And we're going to pull them down to what sounds about right. So because this is a ghost note articulation, you don't actually have to have them, you know, down at whatever number this is, 47. You can keep them fairly high because, again, they're ghost notes, which means that a velocity of 127 is still a ghost note. But I would still suggest varying them because you don't want it to sound like a drum machine. So the other option that we have, or potentially your only option if you don't have a ghost note articulation, would be if you were to program these ghost notes on the regular snare track, which is, depending on the library, I sometimes prefer to do this, but I will program them on a different note. So in this case, D#1. We're going to pretend that this snare rough does not exist. So what I would do is I would set the snare hit articulation to trigger on D1 as normal and D#1. So this means D1 is snare, D#1 is also snare. So the point of doing this is it means that you don't lose your ghost notes. Because if you've programmed, say you've programmed this like this now, where they're all on D1, you're going to be potentially wondering across the course of an entire song, wait a minute, which of these are actually ghost notes? Which of these did I want to be the accents on the beat? And especially with more complicated drum tracks than this, it can be very easy to lose track of where they are. So simply moving them onto a different key means that you never lose them. And even though the sample is the same, you can then select them all with one click and drag them down to whatever velocity you feel is appropriate for your ghost notes. So let's have a listen to that. See, I actually prefer this on Modern and Massive to use the normal snare articulation, but at lower velocity. So let's have a listen to that with the guitars. So when you hear that, you're probably thinking, well, I can't really hear those ghost notes, so I should bring them up. But if you do that, they're no longer ghost notes, and it's going to completely change the feel of the song. So let's try that now to demonstrate. Let's bring them up to there. So see, that is not necessarily bad, but it totally changes the feel of the groove. Also, you have to remember that these guitars are completely raw. They haven't been EQ'd at all. They're just coming straight out of the Kemper. And the Modern and Massive library I have not mixed at all. So this is completely raw. So if this were actually a song being mixed, then there would be ways to make those ghost notes sound more audible without necessarily just turning them up. So the thing to remember with ghost notes is that they're mainly just there for adding texture and groove to an already composed drum track. This kind of thing isn't going to make or break your drums or your song, but it can definitely add some extra bit of excitement to something that's already good. Anyway, that brings us to the end of this video. I am going to cover a couple more programming tips for spicy drums in future, so be sure to check out the Brickwall Sounds website, Facebook, and Instagram to make sure you don't miss them. Let us know what you think in the comments, and we will see you soon.